Hi everyone and welcome back to a new episode of BWD. Today we're gonna code a game which challenges the user to guess a number randomly chosen by the computer. And by the end of the video, you will be able to launch it like this. So we have to guess a number between 0 and 100, and I'm gonna go with 50 as my first guess. The game will be able to hint the user to either go lower or higher. And in our case, 50 is too high, so let's give it a try this time with 25. Okay, this time we have chosen too low. As you can see, we can go ahead with this, and every time we are getting closer and closer to the final solution. Okay, we are almost there, and here we go, 49 is the solution. So if you're new to this channel or you're back watching this video, do not forget timestamps are found in the video description below. And all the code that you're gonna see in this video is available on GitHub. Again, link in the video description below. And now, without further ado, let's get started. So before jumping straight into the code, let's make sure that we are on the same page. Let's go to the board and write down the sequence of steps that the program has to follow to get the job done. So step number 1 is to choose a random number. Then we have to ask to the user to guess it, and step 3 is to collect the guess. And now we get to the main logic of the program. We have to compare the user guess with the actual number. And here there are two possible scenarios. In the first one, the guess is different from the number. Knowing the actual number, we have to hint either to go higher or lower with the new guess, and then go back to step 2 and ask for a new guess. On the other hand, if the guess is right, we should congratulate and stop. So let's make an example with real numbers now. Let's suppose that at step number 1 we get 75. Then we're gonna ask to the user for his guess and collect it, and let's say that we get 60. Now we are step 4, so we're gonna compare. As 60 is lower than 75, we're gonna end up in the first scenario. And we're gonna display something like try higher. So now we have to go back to step 2 and collect a new guess. Let's say 80. At step 4, we're gonna end up in the scenario number 1 also this time, and prompt try lower. Back again to step 2, let's say that we finally get 75. And now at step 4, we're gonna end up in the second scenario. So this time we're gonna congratulate the user and stop it here. Great! Hopefully we are on the same page now and we have a clear understanding of how the program should work. What we have to do next is to implement the steps that we have just seen into the code. Okay, now we are finally ready to start coding. In my case, I'm gonna use as a text editor Vim, but feel free to use whatever you think is best for you. And let's start by step number 1, so we have to pick a random number. However, we're gonna make this number fixed for now. The way this is done in Python is to create a variable, let's call it number, and assign it a value. So let's say 45. But why are we doing this way instead of choosing a random number? That's because as we move along with the exercise, we're gonna test the code and likely we will find some bugs. And it's important that we make the bug reproducible. So if every time the number changes, that might be a problem. So we're gonna complete step number 1 only when we know that the rest of the code is working as expected. Next, we have to communicate to the user that the session is on and we have chosen the random number. To do so, let's use the print function, which let us display a message on the screen. So before moving ahead, let's see if this works or not. Let's open a new window down below and use the Python interpreter to execute our program. In my case, the file where I'm writing all the code is called main, but you can choose whatever you want. So let's launch it and great, we got exactly what we expected. Back to the code, let's move ahead with step number 2. Here what we have to do is to display a message and say to the user, do you want to try? Exactly like before, we're going to use the print function to do so. And before moving ahead, let's check if this works. Right. Okay, now we have to do step number 3, and this is a little bit trickier compared to the previous ones. How can we collect the user guess? This is really easy in Python because we have just to call a new function called input, and then save whatever the user is going to type in into a variable that we're going to call guess. So how can we check this is actually working? Another use of the print function is to display the content of a variable, and we're gonna use it exactly like that to see what's inside the guess variable. Let's run in the window below the program and notice how this time it didn't just end it and exit, but instead is waiting for the user input. And I'm gonna type in 100. Okay, great. As you can see, the program has just displayed my guess. Before moving ahead with step 4, let's do a little bit of refactoring here. One of the goodies of using the input function is the possibility to display a message before the user types in. And that's fantastic because we can write here the wanna try message and drop the print statement. Let's give it a try in the window below. Okay, there is just one thing left to do before we move ahead. As you can see, there is actually no space between the question mark and the number that I type in. So it doesn't look really great, so let's just add a space after the question mark. And here we go, way better. Before moving to step 4, let's drop the print statement. Here we have to compare the user guess with the actual number. And depending on the result, we're gonna take one action or another one. The sequence of instructions is usually called an if-else schema. And to better understand this, let's go back to the board now. An if-else schema is basically made of 3 components, 1 condition and 2 actions. So it works this way. If the condition is true, we're gonna move ahead with action A. On the other hand, if that is not the case, we're gonna perform action B. Coding this in Python is really easy. First, we have to signal for the if-else schema. So we're gonna use the if keyword followed by a condition and then a semicolon. In the line right below, you're gonna write command A. Then we have to complete the if-else schema. So we're gonna use the else keyword followed by a semicolon, and right below, we're gonna write command B. This is the very basic scenario, but sometimes you might have to do something more advanced. You might end up in the scenario where you don't wanna jump straight into the else part, but rather you wanna check another condition. And if that is true, you wanna perform action C. And if you think about it, this is exactly our scenario, right? First, we're gonna check if our guess is higher than the expected number. This is gonna be condition 1. If that is not true, we wanna check condition 2. Is our guess lower than the expected number then? If even this one is false, then we got it right. And this is the else part. Okay, now before going back to code, let me stress a little bit on the syntax of the if-else schema. Do you see the white blinking squares? That is just empty space. That's because command 1, 2 and 3, they are not right below their keywords, but they are shifted to the right. And if you add more commands, they are gonna be all shifted to the right as well. So keep in mind that this shifting to the right is called indentation. Indentation has many roles. One of those is that it groups together code that should be executed at the same time, let's say. And another one is that it improves code readability very much. Let's start by coding the first condition. We're gonna write down the if keyword followed by the condition. So if the guess is higher than the actual number, and then do not forget the semicolon. In the line below, we're gonna use the print function to display the message. And before moving ahead, let's give it a try to see if this works or not. Let's try with 100 and ouch! We got an error. So Python is pretty much saying that the comparison between a string and a number is not supported. And that makes total sense, right? How can you compare a string with a number? But we know that there is no strings in our program. We know that the number that we have to guess is 45, which is a number indeed, and our guess is 100, right? So if you play around a little bit or you either look up for the documentation, you're gonna find that the input function always returns a string. So even if we're gonna type in a number, we're gonna get it in the form of a string. To fix this, we're gonna use the int built-in function. And let me show you in the window below how it works. So I've just launched the Python interpreter, so now I can just type in Python commands and see the output right away. Let's create a number in the form of a string. So I'm gonna type in 3 surrounded by double quotes. As I press enter, I get the result. And notice how we get a number, but this is surrounded by single quotes. This means that this number is not actually a number, but rather a string. But let's see what happens when we pass it to the int function. This time actually we don't get a string, but we get a number. And how do we know that? Because there are no quotes around the number itself. Okay, let's quit the interactive session and let's run the script to see if this works or not. I'm gonna type 100 also this time, and great, it worked. Now let's go back to the text editor to implement what's left. Let's write down the second condition. So we're gonna start with the elif keyword followed by guess minor than number and then the semicolon. Never forget the semicolon, guys. And right below we're gonna use the print function once again. Okay, let's check if this works. Let's write this time a number which is lower than 45 and let's see if we get the right message. Let's see what happens with 20. Alrighty, it works. Let's implement the else part. So we're gonna simply type in else semicolon and right below again the print function. Let's check it this time with the expected number, so 45. and yeah, it works. Okay, we are almost done, but there is still one thing left to do. The program works correctly. For example, if I type in 60, the right message is displayed, but the program just stops there. It doesn't go ahead and ask me for the next guess. So if you think about it, this is like saying, do this set of actions over and over again unless this condition is true. And in our case, this is keep asking me for the next guess unless your guess is right. And in programming, this structure is called loop. There can be different types of loop, but in our case, this is a while loop. It's called this way because the set of instruction is repeated while a condition is verified, which in our case is while the guess is wrong. So now, how do we code this in Python? Once again, it's really easy. First, we're gonna type in the while keyword, followed by the condition, so guess is different from number, and then the semicolon. Okay, now we should write in the set of actions, but they are already down here, right? The thing is that if we leave it like this, it won't work. And why is that? Because the code has to be indented, exactly like for the if-else. Okay, now everything should work, so let's give it a try in the window below. And ouch! So Python is complaining that the guess variable is not defined when we are using it to check the while condition. And if we have a look at the code, we can understand why that is the case. So the thing is that the guess variable, it does exist, because with the input function, we save into the guess variable what the user types in the keyboard. However, the first time that we enter the while cycle, we still have to ask for the first guess, so the guess variable isn't defined yet. To solve this problem, we have to define the guess variable before we enter the while cycle. So we're gonna type in guess equal to none. And what is this none value exactly? So I think that a good way to think about it is, let's imagine a scenario where we have to define a variable, but we don't have a value for it yet. So we're gonna define this variable with a placeholder which says, we don't have a value yet, come back later. So this is exactly what none is used for. And the beauty of it is that when we are checking the while condition, this is gonna be automatically true, because what we are asking is the number different from the guess, which translates to, is the number different from something that doesn't exist? And of course the answer is yes, it doesn't exist, so how come they are equal? They cannot be equal, right? So if this might be confusing, don't worry. Let's go in the window below and let's see this in practice. If I type in 4 equal to none, I'm gonna get false, right? Because 4 is not equal to something that doesn't exist. And if this condition is false, it means that the opposite is automatically right, and that is exactly our case. Okay, now everything should be ready, so let's give it a try. So let's test the first case scenario. So I'm gonna type in a number that is higher, so let's say 100, and here we go. Now let's try with a number which is lower, let's say 30. Okay, great. And finally, let's try with the right number. Okay, now so before we can consider this done, we have to go back to step number 1 and finish it. Because the thing is that every time we play, the number that we have to guess is 45. But instead, the way that should work is that every time we play, a random number is chosen. Also this time, Python makes our life simple, because instead of generating those numbers ourselves, we can use a Python built-in library. So what we have to do is just to import the piece of code that we are interested in and just use it as it is. And in our case, we are interested in a function that allows us to generate those numbers. So what we have to do is just to type in from the name of the library, in this case random, import, and then the name of the function, which is going to be randint. I think the name speaks pretty much for itself, but anyway, this function allows us to generate random numbers that are integers. Let's drop the 45 now. When we use this function, we need to provide the lower and the upper bound, so 0 and 100. So to see if this actually works or not, let's print the number right down here and let's run the program a few times. Okay, we got 0 the first time. Let's give it another go. 15. Okay, so let's try to play around with it. Okay, great. It seems like we finally got it. Okay, we have finally come to the end of this video. If you have any question or feedback, just write it down in the comment section below. Do not forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel to not miss next week's episode. In the meantime, if you want to do more, just check the GitHub repo, where you can find the next steps for this exercise. And with that said, see you in the next one. Ciao!